welcome back to the Friday show brought to you by Woodbine, where it's the penultimate weekend of racing for the 2023 meet. Saturday's La Previante and Sunday's Steady Growth Stakes, both for Ontario breds. I'm Ray Paulick with bloodstock editor Joe Nevills, and we're really happy to be joined by an old friend, Richard Eng, longtime writer, handicapper, publicist, radio host, and the author of Betting on Horse Racing for Dummies, first published in 2005 and updated last year. And I might say a perfect holiday gift for anybody looking to get somebody introduced to horse racing. Rich, welcome to the Friday show.
Hey, thank you, Ray. Thank you, Joe. Happy to be here.
Good to see you. Tell me a little bit, how did the Dummies franchise has, I don't know how many different books they have. And when horse racing, Betting on Horse Racing for Dummies came out, I thought, this is really clever. Tell me how that all came to be.
Well, a little background on Dummies brand is the company that prints them is called Wiley Publishing, based out of Indianapolis, Indiana. And they put out about 80 new titles every year. This is what they told me. So what they do each year is their researchers get together. They draw up a title list of approximately 80 subjects that they want to write new books on. And they work with a number of literary agents from coast to coast. And basically they tell these people, find me an expert in that field that can write a book. And, obviously they'll get a commission if that author gets hired. So as far as myself, a literary agent based out of New York City had the list and was Google searching for a writer and a handicapper. This is in 2004 when she was doing this. And so my name came up more than once, but other people came up too, to be honest with you. And what she did is she literally picked up the phone, cold called a handful of racetracks and talked to their publicity directors and went over the list and asked if this person, what do you think? And incredibly enough, my name was highly recommended more than once. And she chose me to be the first person to offer this opportunity. So she calls me out of the blue from Manhattan to my home in Vegas. And we talked for easily 40 minutes on the phone. And, I went over my background in more detail with her. And at the end of the conversation, Ray and Joe, she offered me the opportunity. She says, well, if you want to write this book, I want to submit your name. And that's how I got hired.
And then can you give us a very, I guess Cliff's Notes is the appropriate term here because it is a book, sort of a Cliff's Notes rundown of what one could find inside the book?
Well, hopefully it's an A to Z on the subject of horse racing and horse race handicapping. The thing with Dummies books, all Dummies books, is they assign you an editor who knows nothing about the topic. And they do that on purpose because as I submitted chapters one by one, the editor would circle stuff and say, tell me, I don't understand this. You have to explain this better. You have to rewrite this. And it was a different kind of writing than I'd ever done in my entire career, whether it was as a publicity director or as a turf writer for the Las Vegas Review-Journal. And so, we covered almost every aspect of horse racing. In other words, if someone knows zero about horse racing and picks up the book a couple weeks out from the Kentucky Derby, if they read this from A to Z, they will know a lot about, what happens with the horses and the breeding, with jockeys, trainers, owners. And this is even, before the handicapping, some of the history of the sport, how we got from point A to point Z. And, I just cover all kind of topics so that person gets pretty well rounded by the time they finish the book. And when they go into Churchill Downs on that first Saturday in May, they won't sound like a nincompoop. They'll actually have some good background to work with.
Well, a lot has changed since the book was first published. I can't remember exactly when we got ADWs, and what were some of the things that were included in the updated edition last year that were added to it?
Well, I was asked about that a lot, and I think I probably changed between 60 to 70% of the book, new material, really updated. If someone was going to spend $25, I wanted them to get $25 worth. But I think the chapter that got the most effort from me as far as research and development was the technology and the handicapping tools that are available. Back in 2003, 2004, there, you could still get things like, the rags and sheets or thorograph and stuff like that. There were certainly a handful of those out there, but the proliferation of handicapping tools available now for the horse player are so much greater in the 20 years since. So I tried to explain some of it, but since it's a Dummies book, I couldn't possibly make the chapter. The chapter could have probably been another book, but I tried to outline a lot of the things that are available for people to get, whether it's workout reports, whether it's pace numbers, just all kinds of things. There's AI handicapping now. So there's all kinds of stuff in that chapter. That was a chapter to me that I spent the most time in trying to update.
Mm-hmm. So I found that the horse racing industry has kind of a love-hate relationship with new customers, with new, people into the game. They constantly say they crave them until they actually have to teach them something. And then it's just, oh, you're in the way. You just, you should already know this. It's not my job to teach you. But as a For Dummies franchise, how do you're talking directly to these people. How do you find has been the most effective way to meet completely new people to horse racing where they stand?
Well, that's a great question. I want to attack it in a couple of ways. One is, I was reading some of the topics that have been coming out at the Arizona Symposium. And, a lot of the marketing campaigns are trying to get new people, younger people into the sport. And, one of the comments I made back to them was that there's a reason why horse players are of an older age, meaning, 40s on up, 50s, 60s, 70s. I think what happens is that our sport, even though you can participate as a $2 bettor, it takes a certain amount of disposable income. It takes a certain amount of time to learn about the sport, and hopefully my book accelerates that process, that education. But I think, believe it or not, our horse racing, it actually suits very well to people who have already maybe built a career, developed their family, maybe have disposable income, more time, to actually spend with it. So I think it's a perfect hand in hand that older people actually like horse racing and have the time to develop the interest in horse racing versus someone who's in their 20s. Now, I know it's sexy to market to, 20 somethings and, show them wearing fancy clothes at the racetrack and stuff like that. But in a lot of ways, that's kind of a tough market to go against, only because those people are developing their careers, maybe they're developing their families, and they don't have the time or the wherewithal at this point in their lives to get into horse racing. So I don't see a problem trying to focus marketing toward an older audience, because those people fit our bill real well.
I'm curious about that. You live in Las Vegas. I assume you spend some time in race books and sports books. How does the demographic between the horse player in Vegas and the sports bettor in Vegas compare?
Well, I must admit, sports has probably successfully marketed to younger people. But I think one of the angles that makes sports betting more attractive to younger folks is the fact that if you take a look at how people bet on certain games, it's almost, well, I hate to call it a coin flip, because you would hate to bet big money on a coin flip. But like, say, if you want to bet the football game tonight, well, you either bet team A or team B, and one team's favored by 7. And so, your decision making actually could be pretty simple, pretty basic, if you just want some interest in the game. Same with, betting basketball, you have point spreads, right, and things like that. So, the thing with horse racing, we have the odds on the horses, and, you can bet on the odds on a horse just blindly, but it would probably help if you do some handicapping. And so that's where the education part comes in, to try to make a more sophisticated wager.
Mm-hmm. Staying on the idea of Vegas race books, how has the general atmosphere at the race books changed over the past 10, 15 years since advanced deposit wagering has become more of a thing. And, it's not the only option, not only in Nevada, but, people don't necessarily have to fly in from wherever just to bet on the races the way that they might have used to if, an OTB wasn't close to them otherwise.
Well, that's a good question, Joe. One thing that I didn't see on anybody's list as far as, topics to cover is if they took a look at Las Vegas and the race and sportsbook industry, they would see a microcosm about what's happening to our sport, and the fact that in the past few years, we have had some new major resorts open. I'm talking about like Resorts World on the Strip, Circa downtown. We just had a Mohegan Sun Casino that Virgin Atlantic is a partner with. We just opened up the Durango Resort, which is owned by Station Casinos. All these properties opened up within the last few years, and unfortunately, not all of them offer horse race betting. They have a sports book, but they don't have a race book. And I think the people in our industry should take a long look, about why this is going on and how they can kind of remedy it, because that's not good if you have a mega resort and there's no horse racing up on the screen. All you can see is the sports betting. So, our people better open their eyes, basically, in the industry.
Wow. Getting back to the newcomers and, the people who would be the target for this book, when you talk to people, and I'm sure that you've introduced a lot of people to the game yourself, what are a few basic primers you give them? Like, here's something you should consider. What are two or three things like that you tell newcomers that, you're probably not telling them to play superfectas.
Well, as far as the wagering menu, I tell folks cashing tickets is the most fun, and you would like to be able to make a lot of money and hit a pick six, but that's not realistic for somebody new. So I would suggest people start out with straight betting, whether it's win place show, win, and what I call 2 race and 2 horse bets, daily double and exactas. And something really simple I tell folks is, if you take a look at a racing program, or you have the Racing Form or Brisnet PPs, and they list the jockey and trainer standings. Well, if you take a look at the top 10 on each, they probably win about 80 or 90% of the races during any given race meet. So right there, you don't even have to handicap a lot to try to find live horses just doing that. So, there's just simplistic things without getting too technical with folks.
Mm-hmm. With that, how do you kind of bounce between conversations between speaking to someone who is sort of more versed in horse racing versus someone who's kind of newer? How do you kind of make your adjustments in the way that you sort of address them?
Well, last summer, or not last summer, this summer, actually, I did 2 book signings back east. I did one at the Museum of Racing in Saratoga, and I did one at the Mohegan Sun Casino in Connecticut. And the casino in Connecticut actually fits more what you were just asking. A lot of people who are basically new to horse racing came up to me. They had a contest where they gave out a lot of my books. Mm-hmm. I autographed them all and answered questions and things like that. And first I told them, read the book. It's a very quick read, as most Dummies books are. But handicapping, while it can be super difficult, can also be fun to do. I look at each race. I tell people I look at each race as like a jigsaw puzzle, and each horse is a piece of the puzzle. And basically, you're trying to figure out, how all the pieces fit. You'll have speed horses, you'll have pace horses, you have closers, and a simplistic way of handicapping a race is, if you see one speed horse, well, that's a pretty good deal. We call that lone speed. That might be a bet. And a secondary situation might be if you see multiple speed horses, well, then I would tend to look toward closers and stalkers and things like that. So, there's simple equations that you can lay out for people too.
Are there things that racetracks can do to make the game a little bit less intimidating or easier to grasp for the newcomer?
Well, I know on the Dummies book they have a tear out page. It's called a cheat sheet, and basically they boil it down to one page of a lot of things that I read about in the book. And one of them was, for example, that betting the top 10 jockeys, top 10 trainers, and kind of doing a mix and match. Those are live animals. The betting angles as far as win, play, show, exactas, and doubles, just focusing on that so you don't get too complex, too ahead of your skis, so to speak. But as far as handicapping, and I talked about looking for the style of the runners and trying to find the equation of how the race is going to actually be played. So these are things that even someone who's pretty new to the sport can kind of figure out just using their common sense and intelligence.
Mm-hmm. Now, you can choose how much of a spoiler in the book you want to go with this, but I noticed in the table of contents you have a series of top 10 lists. 10 best racetracks to visit, best track announcers of all time, best horse racing movies. Is there any of them that you would like to give a little bit of nugget of information on what people can expect, one or maybe something that regular fans of racing might not expect to see appear on the top 10 list? Take that however you want to go with it.
Well, I know of the movies on the list of the movies. I'm a big fan of Jay Cronley, and his writing, and Let It Ride to me is probably one of my favorite horse racing movies. It's not as serious, as say watching Seabiscuit, which it also is a very well done movie. But there's a lot of truth in Let It Ride for the characters that are involved in horse racing that I've seen over my 40 years.
Mm-hmm. I'm with you on that one for sure. What about tracks? What's near the top or at the top of your list?
Well, I had the honor of starting my career at the New York Racing Association, and I started at Aqueduct in the press box in the publicity department. But I remember my first Saratoga, and I was thinking to myself, they are paying me to go to Saratoga. So that's something I'll never forget. I had a chance to go back there, obviously, when I did the book signing at the museum. So I spent 2 days at Saratoga, and incredibly enough, I actually bumped into some people, 40 years later that still around. And so that's nice. When I worked at Turfway Park, I had a chance to go to Keeneland quite often, and Churchill. And I did spend some time working with ABC Sports and ESPN on their horse racing broadcast. So, being paid to go to the Kentucky Derby, the Preakness at Belmont, Breeders' Cup, that's about as much fun as you can get in our game. So the one track that's on my bucket list, because I've been to all the others, including places that are closed like Arlington Park and Hollywood Park, is Oaklawn. I've never been to Oaklawn, and I want to get there.
So that kind of leads into my question. As a small track guy, I would be remiss if I didn't ask, are there any particularly out of the way places that made your top 10 lists? Any sort of hidden treasures that people might not necessarily expect to see in a top 10 list like that?
Well, this track did not make my top 10 list, but I had as much fun there when I visited as any track I've ever been at. But when I was doing some work at Monmouth Park, I had a chance to meet Larry Colmus and also Steve Schwartz, the late Steve Schwartz. And during a busman's holiday, we went to Timonium for the races. And Larry's dad, I guess, was the sound manager or did something important at Timonium. So everybody knew Larry. And when we went there, Larry was treated like the king. And since we were part of his entourage, we got treated pretty well too. And that was as much fun as I can remember having at a small track.
Well, you've been playing the races for 40 years or more, probably, right?
Oh, sure.
What's the biggest change that you've seen over the time you've been doing this for a horse player?
Well, I think the thing that really irks a lot of people now is the late odds changes and the computer assisted wagering and the late money that jams into the pools late. It's created an unbalanced playing field. And it takes some of the fun out of playing the races. I mean, something as basic as if you find a decent horse to bet on at 10-1 and the horse wins, and then the odds change down to 6-1. It's like it's not good. I really wish that was something that they took care of and took care of quickly, because that stuff didn't happen 40 years ago.
Mm-hmm. Amen. And by the way, I agree with you on Let It Ride. I think it's just a classic, an all-time classic. Who doesn't like that movie?
Now, computer-assisted wagering, the late odds changes, those are pretty in the weeds subjects for, even veteran horse players, but it is something that does affect somebody who's, going to the racetrack for the first time. I bet on a horse that left the gate at, a certain price and comes home and it's a different price. How do you explain something that sort of deep in the weeds to someone who isn't really familiar with all the parts, or do you just kind of leave that for later conversations and just say you'll learn when you're older, I guess?
Well, quite frankly, I haven't had to have that conversation too often with newcomers, or hardly at all, but I certainly hear from it with people who've been in the game for a long time, like the three of us. And it's an unfair advantage in the fact that not only do they get to jam all the bets in at the last minute, but they're getting significant rebates. And, the rebate industry actually began here in Las Vegas. I don't know if you folks remember the history, but it actually started out here. Someone put pencil to paper in the fact that, if a track has a blended takeout rate of 18 to 20%, and I'm only paying 3% for the signal, I've got 15 to 17% to play with the customer. And so, a lot of the biggest customers out here in Vegas during that time, got a percentage as a rebate for betting. But, that's still different than what these computer wagering groups are getting in, because they can jam thousands and thousands of dollars of bets in the last few seconds, last minute of a race. That was something that even the rebaters, the original rebaters here in Vegas, weren't able to do.
Well, the book is Betting on Horse Racing for Dummies, updated last year, and the author is Richard Eng. Rich, we really appreciate you taking time to join us on the Friday show this week.
Yeah, fantastic spending time with you folks. And, I sell the most books during the peak periods of the Triple Crown and the Breeders' Cup, and also Christmas. So we're right before Christmas. This would make a nice gift for a newcomer family or friend to get introduced to the sport.
Well, thanks again, Rich, and thanks to Woodbine for their ongoing sponsorship of the Friday show. One more week of racing after this weekend at Woodbine, and we'll see you next week on the Friday show.
Support award-winning independent horse industry journalism and become a Paulick Report Insider on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, insiders get access to exclusive Q&As with Paulick Report staff, insight behind our editorial process, exclusive opinions and on-site analysis, Paulick Report merch, and more. This is not a paywall. The website you know and love will always be the same. But if you want more, and you want to make our coverage even better, visit patreon.com/Paulick Report and become a Paulick Report Insider today.